Howdy, it's Kyle talking about state parks. Every state has a park system designed to protect areas that are very scenic that might not be as large or as grand as areas set aside for national parks, and in this video I'm going to take a look at the best ones. The states are arranged alphabetically and you can use that like chapters to skip around, but it is difficult to define best, so what I was going with are parks that showcase something truly unique in that state or parks that showcase something that you wouldn't expect to find in that state. But either way, let's take a look at the best state parks in the country. Starting off with Alabama, it's Buck's Pocket State Park in the northeastern portion of the state. It's about an hour from where I live, and I've been there many times. It's at the southern end of both the Appalachian Mountain Range and the Cumberland Plateau, so there's some really nice variation in geology there, not really what you might expect in Alabama. I've never been to Alaska, but I can assume that most of the state parks are beautiful, and the one I wanted to highlight here is Chugach State Park, just outside of Anchorage. There are 300,000 people in the city, and this gorgeous park is only about a half an hour outside of it, so I'm willing to bet that your city doesn't have this only half an hour away. Arizona doesn't really have a lot of state parks, and most of them are very small, but the one I wanted to highlight is Tonto Natural Bridge State Park, right in the middle of the state, and it highlights a really cool natural bridge and some other interesting rock formations in a part of the country known for rock formations, but there'll be a lot fewer people here than at the national parks in the area. Arkansas has many popular state parks in the northwestern portion of the state in the Ozarks and Ouachita, but I wanted to highlight Cane Creek State Park in the southeastern portion of the state. It's much more low-lying and swampy. It's a great place to go paddling, and it's not too far from the Mississippi River, and it's also much less crowded than some of the more mountainous parks in the other parts of the state. California, a huge state with a large number of state parks, but I wanted to show Limekiln State Park right along the coast. Most people know this part of the state for the Big Sur coastline, the big drive with the wonderful bluffs, but this is the part of the state that's just interior from that, some nice mountainous wilderness areas, and you can really get away from the crowds that you might see at some of the looky-loo parking spots off the Big Sur Highway. There are no shortage of beautiful state parks in Colorado, and Sylvan Lake is one of them. I like this one because it's really close to Interstate 70, so if you're traveling this part of the country doing some of the Four Corners national parks, they might be really busy, but it's much easier to find a campsite here at a state park, and it's a beautiful setting as well. There's no true wilderness in Connecticut, but in the northwestern portion of the state is Campbell's Falls State Park, some nice wooded areas in the Berkshire Mountains and some nice waterfalls, as the name would imply, so a good river. There's some nice peaceful serenity in the state that is mostly urban and suburban. Delaware is a small state, not a large number of state parks, and it's mostly known for suburbs of Philly or for its beaches, but there are some nice swampier areas in the southwestern portion of the state, including Trap Pond State Park here. Really good spot to go paddling, and it's not very crowded at all. A lot of people are surprised to learn that there are a lot of caves in Florida, but most of them are underwater. Florida Cavern State Park in the Panhandle is a great place to explore Florida caves without being underwater. This is a fairly popular park, but you can get guided tours through some lit parts of the cave, and you can also go into farther back parts of the cave crawling around on your hands and knees with a helmet with a light on it. Another one that's really close to where I live is Cloudland Canyon State Park in the northwestern corner of Georgia. This really has national park-like scenery in a much smaller area where you have a really beautiful west rim trail, and it's also at the southern end of the Appalachian Mountain and the southern end of the Cumberland Plateau. A lot of varied geology, a lot of great caves as well. I could have essentially picked any state park in Hawaii and it would have been a great one, but I wanted to go with Waimea Canyon on Kauai because Kauai is the least visited of the four major islands, but really you can't go wrong with a state park in Hawaii. All you're going to do is look around and see incredible beauty, including this one here on Kauai. Idaho has a lot of wilderness, and Farragut State Park and the Panhandle is one of these areas, but this part of the state is becoming much more popular with people moving there, with a lot of resorts and vacation homes, but you can still get a lot of wilderness in the Panhandle of Idaho with this beautiful state park. If you think Illinois is all flat and boring and cornfields, then check out the northwestern corner of the state at Mississippi Palisades State Park, some high bluffs right along the river, and this is in the driftless area of this kind of quad state area around there. Very beautiful, quite unexpected for Illinois. Southern Indiana has a lot of rolling hills and karst topography and some really beautiful scenery, and Obannon Woods State Park is a great place to see it. You're not too far from the Ohio River and the Kentucky border, and just some really nice pocket wilderness in Indiana. Another state park that highlights something you might not expect to see is Makokata Cave State Park in eastern Iowa. Usually you don't think of Iowa when you think of karst and caverns, but there are some really nice caves in this part of the state that you can tour, some gorgeous scenery on the surface as well. In east central Kansas are the Flint Hills, and Flint Hills Trail State Park is where you can access the big Flint Hills Trail. And normally you think of Kansas, you think of the western portion of the state, flat, or you think of wheat fields, but this area has a lot of rolling hills and some nice pretty water sources and some nice wooded areas. In northeastern Kentucky is Tigard State Forest, another area with some karst topography and caves. There's a river you can paddle down and some nice wilderness type trails you can go through in the mountainous parts of this state. Louisiana has a lot of coastline, but not many beaches because most of the coastline is just swampy. But Grand Isle State Park in the southeasternmost portion of the state has a nice sandy beach where you can go out onto, and you can also see some of the more swampy type Louisiana lowlands once you go inland a little bit. There was no doubt that for Maine, it was going to be Baxter State Park, one of the largest state parks in the country. It's home to Mount Katahdin, which is the beginning of the Appalachian Trail, and this is one of the largest tracts of genuine wilderness in the eastern U.S. and a beautiful spot. When most people think of Maryland, the first part of the state they think of probably isn't the Panhandle in the mountainous part, but Garrett State Forest at the far western end of the Panhandle is this beautiful mountainous spot right there on the West Virginia border. Some nice hiking, some nice waterfalls, and what you might not be expecting from Maryland. Massachusetts, another small state, there isn't going to be really any true wilderness, but you do have a really cool state park called Savoy Mountain in the northwestern portion of the state. You're in the Berkshires, so it's a smaller state park. It doesn't have spectacular scenery, but with such a densely populated state, it is nice to have a getaway like this. For Michigan, I wanted to go a little more hipster with Negwagon State Park on the Lake Huron shoreline. Most of the main parks in the state are going to be in the Upper Peninsula and the vacation homes on the Lake Michigan shoreline, but this part of the state has much fewer visitors and has some nice, quiet, secluded beaches and some nice wooded areas outside of it. In the extreme northeastern corner of Minnesota is Grand Portage State Park right there along the shores of Lake Superior. Some really nice lake views, some wooded areas for hiking, and it's home to Minnesota's tallest waterfall as well. In the northeastern portion of Mississippi is Tishomingo State Park, and you don't see a lot of varied topography or exposed geology in Mississippi, so this is a nice spot to get some good hiking in wooded areas, but also see some nice rock formations and good variations in topography. Montauk State Park in south central Missouri is a beautiful spot in wooded areas, and this is where you start on the Current River. So we went canoe camping down the Current River for several days. Beautiful river, nice wooded parks. You don't go through any towns, beautiful scenery. It's Montana, so of course it's going to be beautiful, and I'm going with Painted Rock State Park in the southwestern portion of the state. Big mountains, big lake, and as the name implies, some beautiful painted rocks, but you can't go wrong with Montana state parks. In the northwestern corner of Nebraska is Chadron State Park, and this is a very pretty spot and definitely not what you would think of when you think of Nebraska. Some nice badlands area, some good hiking trails in the area, and it's also very quiet. Very few people visit this park. Cathedral Gorge State Park is a small park but protects a very beautiful canyon in eastern Nevada about 2.5 hours north of Vegas. Some really nice wilderness trails going through some very pretty desert scenery. Mount Washington State Park in New Hampshire protects one of the tallest mountains in the eastern U.S., and it's also known to have some of the world's worst weather. It's common for wind speeds to reach over 200 miles an hour up here, so don't go up to this place in the winter, but it's beautiful during the summer. New Jersey is mostly urban and suburban, so it's nice to have a beautiful park like this right in the middle of the state. Brendan Burns State Forest is one of several state forests and state parks right in this middle part of the state that protects this nice wooded area with some good swampy lowlands for paddling, but you need this in New Jersey to get away from some of the megalopolis. Cimarron Canyon State Park in northern New Mexico is another large state park that protects national park level scenery, some high mountain wilderness, and some big backcountry wilderness trails. For New York, you have to go with Adirondack Park. It's the largest state park in the contiguous U.S. It's about the size of Massachusetts, but only 200,000 people live there. Some beautiful wilderness, some of the higher mountains in the Appalachians, and a ton of lakes for paddling around. North Carolina has a ton of waterfalls, and Gorges State Park in the Appalachians is one of those. And this isn't anywhere near as highly visited as Great Smoky Mountains National Park, so if you want to see some wonderful Appalachian scenery, you don't have to go into the national park. You can see it here and see far fewer people. 30 miles east of Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota is Little Missouri State Park. There aren't that many people that visit the national park, and even fewer visit the state park, but it protects the same level of beautiful North Dakota badland scenery, so nice backcountry in a state where you wouldn't expect to find this stuff. Shawnee State Park and State Forest in south central Ohio protects a fairly large area of woods not too far from the Ohio River. It's fairly dense. You got some nice rolling hills there, some good, almost wilderness level type stuff to go hiking or paddling. At the extreme western end of the Oklahoma Panhandle is the highest point in the state, Black Mesa, and Black Mesa State Park. And this is a really pretty area, some really nice Badlands-esque scenery, and you're going to see some pretty cool stuff, but not many people there at all. For Oregon, I'm going to cheat and just go with the entire coast because all of the beaches in Oregon are state parks and they're public. So you can just go to any of these gorgeous beaches, whether they be sandy or rocky or cliffs, and they're all public, they're all state parks. For Pennsylvania, I'm going with just a large general area in the north central part of the state. There are many different state forests and state parks that are all contiguous to make up this big giant area that's referred to as the PA Wilds. And this is one of the largest areas of genuine wilderness you're going to find in the east. A lot of great mountains, a lot of great backcountry hiking, just beautiful scenery. Our smallest state doesn't have a whole lot of room for state parks, but one called Beavertail is a very pretty spot that's at the end of a peninsula. It looks kind of like a beaver tail, but you got some nice wooded areas in there a little bit, and some good rock formations you can climb around right there on the beach. Another swampy state park that I wanted to highlight is Santee State Park in South Carolina. This is right along the Congaree River where it's dammed up to be Lake Marion, but it's just a little bit downriver from Congaree National Park. Beautiful spot for some wilderness swamp type stuff and a great spot to go paddling. South Dakota is another state with an obvious choice. Custer State Park in the Black Hills has some gorgeous scenery and you're guaranteed to come up close to some bison if you want to, but some nice backcountry hiking as well that won't be as popular as some of the more national park or national forest areas in the region. One of my favorite places in Tennessee is Pickett State Park along the Kentucky border, and Tennessee has more caves than any other state, and this is a park that protects a large area of karst and cave topography. You can see some here, and you can also go paddling in the lake and river. For Texas, I had to go with Big Bend Ranch State Park, which is right along the Rio Grande and the Mexican border, directly adjacent to Big Bend National Park, and you get the same type of scenery here as a national park. Beautiful, wonderful backcountry hiking, but a lot fewer people because it's a state park, not the national park. When it comes to state parks, you just cannot go wrong with Utah, probably my favorite state park system in the country, and the one I'm going with here is Kodachrome Basin, right in that part of the state where people go to on the big road trips to visit all the national parks. This is every bit as beautiful as a national park, but again, fewer crowds because it's a state park. For Vermont, I'm going with Groton State Forest, and just like Pennsylvania, there are many state parks within this state forest, so it is just a large region of contiguous state parks that protects beautiful Appalachian Mountain, Green Mountain scenery. In southwestern Virginia is Grayson Highland State Park, which is home to the state's highest point at Mount Rogers, and it's also where you can see some wild horses. The Appalachian Trail goes right through here, so there's some very pretty Appalachian scenery in Virginia. For Washington, I'm going with 3 different state park islands, Jones, Posey, and Mesa Islands. These are only accessible by boat, and once you get there, you can hike around or you can camp on them as well. So it is nice to have some just really cool islands you can just paddle out to and explore. A state park in West Virginia that isn't that well known is Beartown. There are some really cool exposed rock formations there, some cool geology, and a really neat boardwalk walking path that goes around the park. So this isn't very well known, but definitely do check it out. For Wisconsin, I really like Black River State Forest. You have the Black River, but you also have a lake there, and it's a fairly large park, so it's a big area of wooded wilderness you can really go hiking around and then get lost in. Just west of Center in Wyoming is Sinks Canyon State Park. Most people visit the state for Yellowstone or Grand Teton National Parks, or they're driving across the state along I-80. This is between the two, lightly visited, so if you want to see some way off the beaten path Wyoming wilderness, check out Sinks Canyon. So that's my look at the best state parks in the country, and you can often get the same type of scenery and nature experiences at state parks as opposed to the much more crowded national parks. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography. I'm doing videos like this and talking about cities and states, and everything I do comes from a more nerdy type perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Charles G. So if you're interested in buying a pin for the viewer pin map that I update every now and then, or just to support the channel, check out my Patreon page, link in the description, and as always, thank you very much.